In my last video on the 2025 Canadian federal election, I noted some peculiarities with some of the ridings that literally flipped by one vote, in some cases 4 votes or a dozen votes. And I noted that this was unlike perhaps any Canadian election before where there were so many tight races. Now, some said in the comments, of course that's the case because the election was rigged. It was rigged in favor of Mark Carney, and that's why these seats are flipping. I must say there are some that are flipping to Conservative, but besides the point, that gets us away from what I think we should be talking about, which is the rise of third-party financing. Third-party financing has exploded in Canadian elections since 2015, not only in terms of the number of third parties out there, but in terms of the actual dollar amounts, with one group providing, I think, over $1 million. We'll get to all of that. But before we do, folks, my name is Christopher Balkaran. I host the Open Minds podcast, where I explore the world's biggest topics, leading with genuine curiosity. So if you're liking my content, hit that like button and definitely subscribe. So you might be asking, Christopher, what the heck is a third party? Now, I sourced this from Wikipedia because elections.ca doesn't have any information, but at a very high level, this is what a third party is. A registered third party is a person or group that wants to participate in or influence elections other than as a political party, electoral district association, nomination contestant, or candidate. There are no limits to what a third party can spend on political advertising pre-campaign. So they can't run for office, they can't appear on your ballot, and they can't directly influence politicians. So while they can't legally give money to political parties, they can run attack ads on specific parties, on specific leaders that can run at times where you're watching the news or you're scrolling through your phone, etc. This is very expensive, very costly for the average person, but this organization or series of organizations can, and the more they can buy up airtime, the more they kind of influence public opinion, especially when it comes to very intense topics, climate change, fossil fuels, etc. A registered third party is Friends.ca, Friends of Canadian Media, I think. It basically defends public broadcasting here in Canada. But what's interesting is their policy proposals are almost completely identical, if not one, for what the Liberals proposed in 2021. Friends said, quote, they want to strengthen funding and independence of CBC/Radio-Canada against foreign tech encroachment. Well, the Liberals in 2021, in their platform, they say, we will increase CBC and Radio-Canada's funding and modernize its mandate to compete with online platforms. What's also interesting about Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, if you were to go on friends.ca, there is no annual report. I was looking for financial statements, etc. But yet this organization donated over $500,000 in 2019, which matched smaller political parties in their total spend. So it's very interesting that some of these organizations just don't have publicly accessible documents of how they've shaped or helped shape the public narrative on some of these issues. But then there's Unifor. Unifor's influence on political platforms. If I were to read out some of their policies, you would think that this would be a politician that you've heard on TV before talk almost identical about these issues and how they frame it. Now, Unifor is Canada's, I believe, largest trade union organization, and it has a lot of money apparently to spend on political ads. I'll get to the money in a second, but before I do, here are some of their policy objectives and policy stances. Now, as you can imagine, they're a lobby group for union members, and so they want more pro-union legislation. And back in 2019 and 2021, when there was this push for clean energy, I guess there still is, they wanted a, quote, just transition for workers in those fields. Well, if you fast forward and look at the NDP and Liberal platforms, they use that same phraseology, that just transition for fossil fuel workers who are now transitioning into more clean energy solutions. They also support strong public broadcasting. Noticing a theme here? And they want gig worker protections for our Uber and Lyft drivers, etc., who are working in the gig economy, who can't afford pensions and benefits and making sure that they're taken care of. Now, the NDP's policies in 2019 and 2021 are a direct mirror of what Unifor has campaigned for. The NDP said, we want to take the profit out of long-term care. We want to reverse the funding cuts to the CBC. We want to support workers in transitioning to green jobs. And of course, Unifor's president, Jerry Diaz, has spoken before at NDP events and publicly endorsed several NDP candidates himself. And you can imagine that during the pandemic, there were a lot of worker supports that Unifor advocated for that certainly probably shaped the government's response through things like the CERB, which was one of the government's largest budget items during the COVID pandemic, and certainly something that came under greater scrutiny at the tail end when workers or some were receiving CERB payments without clear understanding of whether or not they were qualified for it. But get this, folks. In 2015, Unifor had spent $150,000 on political campaigning. Then it grew in 2019 to $400,000, over double. And then by 2021, it grew to $447,000. Now, again, I don't think this is just buying goodwill. I think there's a clear emphasis on shaping public policy for both Liberal and NDP parties because there's a gap in understanding what workers want. And, in a way, political parties don't want to go out there and talk to workers, to every organization, because they just can't. But it seems like they're heavily reliant on these third parties, in this case, Unifor, to fill that gap, tell the government what workers need, and then mirror that policy in actual legislation once they get into power. Now, it's not just those on the left. I just want to make that clear that there are those on the right as well that are very shady and also spend hundreds of thousands of dollars as third parties in our elections. The two I wanted to mention first is Canadians United for Change. Now, if you go on their website, there's not much here. There's like a couple blog posts, no leadership. I have no idea who's on their board, but they claim to be, quote, skilled trade advocates, but there's actually no evidence of any of their campaigns or any of their activity, but yet they spent $344,000 in 2019. And then there's Canada Proud, which says they're working to defeat Justin Trudeau. Their website's still up. You can check it out. They claim to reach millions per week with their ads and their media, apparently, but there's no fiscal reporting available. I don't know who these people are. And they spent $192,000 as well. And so we can see that the public narrative is very much shaped by the influence of these third parties. So I know, going back to the thesis of this video, a lot of people said, 2025 election was rigged. It was rigged in favor of Mark Carney. When you start looking at third-party financing, we see that there are organizations spending record numbers more than ever before, and they're spending it to shape public policy and shape the public conscience on topics like worker supports, climate change, full-on campaigns against Mark Carney with limited oversight, no transparency at all. And I imagine once more reports come out of 2025, there's going to be a further explosion of third-party agencies that have shaped our election. Now, again, I know that these topics are complicated. I know it's not easy to dissect and unpack them. But when we allow labor unions and trade organizations and associations like the Canadian Medical Association is registered, when we allow these industry-specific, policy-specific third parties to have such a play in our politics, in our discourse, in our media, etc., we start wondering, well, why is it being shaped by fewer and fewer actors? I think that that's the bigger question we should be asking. But I'd love to know what you think. I know this is a very intense topic, but I know Canadians deserve to know more. So let me know below what you think. I'll keep digging through the data to get you some more clarity about what exactly these organizations are funding. But I'd love to know what you think, so leave a comment below, let me know what you think, and again, please hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and let everyone you know that Open Minds, Christopher Balkaran, is the place to have these types of conversations right here in Canada. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll catch you in the next one.